On today's World Insight, digital tools and advancing green innovation, what cutting-edge technology means for communities shifting to renewable power and eco-friendly solutions in this gathering of the World Trade Organization's Public Forum. On stage, Nelly Cheboy of TechLit Africa, Robin Salwas of e-Agronomy, Golestan Radwan of the UN Environment Program, Somnath Baidia Roy of the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and Thomas Lamanauskas of ITU.
My name is Tian Wei. I'm a moderator for this session. It is entitled Digital Boost to Green Innovation. Some say, wow, you got all of these critical words inside the same panel. Digitalization, as we know, has been transforming our world, even though there are challenging issues related to it. But we are seeing it is making a difference to our lives and the many around the world. Meanwhile, green innovation is so important as we are approaching the tasks of SDGs. We all know how challenging it is today. So how can we bring the synergy between the two, digitalization and green innovation? Now, digitalization, let's explain the topic a little bit. Which stage is it happening from your parts of the world? From your industry, what are some of the major trends that you're watching very closely that could contribute to our discussion today?
I see that on the digitalization side, and if you connect it with sustainability, there are three main aspects that are happening right now. One is monitoring the impact to the nature. So this is where the digitalization has a very big role to play to see what is the impact of different, well, in my case, farming practices and etc. Second is bringing new knowledge to people to implement sustainable practices. So that's where digitalization can spread way more than we can do in one-to-one human interactions. And then the third thing is bringing finances or financial incentives to those who actually want to apply new practices and making this automatic and digital. So I think right now especially on the sustainability field, we are mainly on the piloting phase of those aspects, but eventually we want to move more towards scaling. Just to give you an example, we are working today with 1.4 million hectares of farmers, but there are billions all around the world who are waiting for these solutions. So I think we are doing very well with the innovation part, but we have to do way more on the implementation part.
Good answer, I guess. It also gives us a very good beginning, because today we are not just going to talk about the challenges. We are going to talk about the solutions. We're going to talk about the actions. That's what we are here for. Nell?
So I'm coming from the education landscape, and I grew up in poverty myself, and I went to school barefoot, but I feel it has gotten a lot harder right now to be a child in rural Kenya. At least when I was growing up, the rivers were not dry. Right now the rivers are dry. We can't even harvest. The last time we had a good harvest was 2019, and so it's getting really worse. And all the people are trying to do, they're like, let's plant more trees. They just wanna do all they can about climate change. They're just planting trees. And so it has become extremely hard to be a kid in rural Kenya. And so when I think about the digital economy, I think about being able to work remotely for any company in the world without leaving your village. That's what we're coming at. And I think it's really cheap. It's really cheap to do that. All you need to do is educate our kids, educate our population, how they can work as software engineers, how they can work as producers, how they can do that from the communities, because you don't have to leave home to make it.
Well said. From our own village for the global community.
Thank you very much, Ray, and indeed to the global community, and I think I'm following up on that, because as you say, from our corners of the world, so my corner of the world is the world, you know, as the UN Agency of Digital Technologies. I think it's great to follow on Robin and Nelly, because they already showed how digital can be important in different areas, from agriculture to education. But of course, to achieve that, we have to have infrastructure in place. And I think we still, you know, so we just released new numbers of connectivity, which shows that currently we have 5.4 billion people connected to the internet, but still 2.6 billion people offline. And behind those numbers is a few also trends. First is that this double-digit growth on connectivity that we enjoyed every year during the COVID, really COVID boost we call it sometimes, is now a bit of a tapering off, so it's still growing, but not at that fast pace. And of course, another thing that's behind that is the disparities in the connectivity. So if we have in the high-income countries more than 90% of people connected, in the low-income countries less than a third is, you know, and I think that's where picking up what Nelly said, you know, about these opportunities, that's where exactly those opportunities are, that's where also that divide is, you know, and that's how, and it's important to overcome that divide to get that boost. And we see that divide with the really sometimes negative consequences. You know, UNESCO recently released a report about education in the context of COVID-19 and remote education, and demonstrated how actually COVID, you know, decreased those inequalities in education as well, you know, by 500 million students being excluded from education as the world moved to online education. And of course, then, so this is like a basics what we have, but of course we're now starting to talk about this, what we call still emerging technologies, even though in many ways they emerged, like AI. And there we also see, of course, big disparities as well. You know, we see the good potential to tackle challenges from development, for economic development to climate, but we see disparities. So statistics say, for example, that in terms of economic boost to China's economy, AI could add around 26% of GDP by 2030. To North America, nearly 15%, but those numbers are much very different in other parts of the world. So I think that's, so I think we have digitalization growing and becoming more pervasive, but we have huge disparities that we need to overcome.
Right. You talk a lot about the challenges, which I hope you are going to provide some of the solutions a bit later.
We'll try.
Okay. And by the way, I also have some numbers to share with our audience. So this is from this house, from WTO. Data from WTO. Global digital service trade reached already about 3.82 trillion US dollars in the year 2022. That is marking a 3.9% year-on-year increase in this quite challenging economic situation we are talking about. And that's accounting for about 53 to 54% of global service trade overall. So digitalization is really catching up when we talk about trade, just to add to some of your numbers earlier. Let me go to you also, Sally, about your thoughts from the UNEP's perspective. Where is digitalization of the things that you are dealing with today?
Well, one of the things that I love about the world we live in today, Wei, is that it forces us to think beyond borders, not just geographical borders, but also across sectors and across industries and across domains. So in this day and age, you can no longer talk about trade, for example, without talking about digitalization, without talking about the environmental impact of things, without talking about the economic agenda and education and literacy and so on. And what this forces us to think about as well are the enablers. And Thomas talked about connectivity, so I'm going to talk about data. So imagine a scenario where, we don't have to imagine it, it happened a few weeks ago when we had those terrible floods in India. And India is one of the biggest suppliers of rice in the world. So initially it's an environmental crisis, but it also has impacts on the global supply chain of rice. So many countries had to review how they're going to meet their needs to feed their local populations because of the floods that happened in India. Now imagine if we had the right data at the right time that would allow us to forecast these types of disasters via digital channels, being able to communicate them and put in place mitigation measures to at least lessen the effect on the global supply chain of rice. So these are the kinds of stories that data tells us. And from an environmental perspective, just to bring it back to my domain, that's also what we try to do. So we have, across the United Nations, we have 92 SDG indicators, and we're already able to track up to 42% of them using data. Of course, that leaves another 58%, and we're working on that. But it's important that we look at these data sets holistically. How does environment cross-intersect with digital? What is the digital impact, and what is the environmental impact? We always have to look at both sides of the coin.
Professor, looking at the panel, beside me, you are the only one coming from Asia. And as a moderator, I would not be able to comment. So your voice is so crucial from a huge proportion of the world population as well. Where is Asia in terms of digitalization, knowing that you are an expert in atmospheric science? Please, Professor.
So I'll give you an example, like, Tian, when you at the beginning, you talked about, like, this topic has, or this session has all these buzzwords. So I was thinking of, like, the one thing that I work on is renewable energy, which kind of hits a lot of these green, digital, and trade, these buzzwords. And it's a great kind of success story, especially in India. And in India, what I have personally seen in the last, 7-8 years, that we have grown from almost a very small player in renewables to today we are in the top 5 in whichever metric that you use, in mostly in wind and solar. And this would not have been possible, not just installed capacity, but also like grid penetration of renewables, if there was no widespread digitalization. Now, when you run, relying on wind and solar, basically we all know that these are intermittent. The wind blows hot and cold. The sun is shining, a cloud comes in, the sun is gone. So obviously, to handle this intermittency, basically, if you are a grid operator, you have to somehow manage the supply with the demand. And so this is something that we get. My student has a startup, and there are a number of other startups that are working in this field, is like getting all this data, starting from consumption at an individual consumer's meter, and to the generation from an individual inverter in a solar plant. You put them together, you get real-time information about what is the load, what is the demand. You take all this data and then feed it into your forecast models, AI-based models often, to forecast what is going to happen. So if you are a grid operator and you did not have access to this data and you did not know how to use this data, we are looking at perhaps large-scale power cuts when the wind dies down, or we are looking at grid instabilization when there is a power surge. So without digitalization, I think this success story that we have would not have happened. And we are going kind of full steam ahead, by 2027, I think almost more than half, almost 75% of our power perhaps will come from renewables.
There are a lot of questions like this that need to be worked out, both as infrastructure level and also at the action level. Having said that, though, you mainly focus on your home country, India, and rightly so. If I could also provide some data about Asia as a whole, the latest that we got is that Asia accounts for 60% of the overall global digital-related patents and new technologies over the past few years. So that's a very promising continent we are talking about. I don't want to only talk about Asia, because Africa, as a very important part of the developing economies, plays a critical role, especially with the Africa free trade area, the continental free trade area. We see a lot of young people like Nelly go banking, for example, with the digital means. So all of this is really changing. Besides the earlier stereotypes we have about the developing economies and even the least developed economies, we are seeing changing right now. You probably also could tell similar stories from your parts of the world.
Well, absolutely. Well, the kind of on the digitalization, the main difference that we see, and probably that some people who have visited Africa see as well, is that in Europe we have been more on the computer. In Africa, it's already in the smartphone. So it's a bit like always in those developing countries, you skip steps, you go ahead right away. But in the end, it's all the same. In our case, if you want to kind of move global economy more towards sustainability, then digitalization has to be part of this, because you cannot go physically, in our case, to all of the farmers and ask what are your emissions. You need digital tools for this. You cannot go like physically all the power plants. You cannot see what are the emissions over there. You need the digitalization for this. And in that sense, Europe and Africa are quite similar. The difference that we see, for example, is that on the aspect where the money is coming from in transforming toward digitalization and toward the greener economy. In Europe, it's mainly coming from the value chain. So if we are incentivizing farmers to apply more sustainable practices, it is usually paid by the value chain players, so by food companies. In Africa, I think the key theme is voluntary carbon market. And this is something that is bringing more income to African economy and is directing this and paying basically for the digitalization and at the same time for the greener economy. So these are the differences we are noticing.
Nelly, please, how you are localizing, for example, in Africa, these challenges and try to provide solutions while you are going along the way.
So your question about some of the local solutions. So there's a company that is very close to where we are in Mogotio that is actually, they hired a lot of local youth in the community to actually do AI work. So they were working remotely for self-driving cars and help train those AI models. And that created a tons of jobs, a lot. And we're seeing so many opportunities for youth in the community to actually work remotely for these companies. And it's creating a lot of jobs, and it's very, very optimistic that way.
Let's talk about the solutions, because we promised our audience earlier about the solutions. Recently, we have seen among whether it is bilateral, multilateral, or regional trade mechanism, they are trying to deal with data flows. They're trying to deal with rules of data flows and trying to set some examples. WTO has also been working a lot of research on that. So how do you see what are some of the most promising areas we're looking at, and that could provide some impetus for our future to shine on the future solutions? Thomas.
Think about your questions, there's like two sides to that. Solutions for not having enough and solutions for having too much, So it's like, and I'll explain what I mean by that, So because we kind of see these two sides of digital as well, of digital inequality and ability not to be, the promise of when people are not connected, when this digital world is not at their hands. And then another aspect which we spoke as well about as we progress with the digital, which are the risks this is creating, in terms of climate risks, as we discussed, from e-waste to emissions, but also, of course, and you started to talk here about data governance. Now we increasingly talk about risks of artificial intelligence and others. And I think we kind of need solutions for both, So because I think sometimes we focus on one or the other. We say, how do we bring digital to everyone? Or then we kind of get totally scared and say, no, actually, it's also risky. We kind of need to reclaim cyberspace for humanity. We need to manage this development. So I think for us, exactly from ITU's perspective, we look at both sides. So of course, infrastructure development, we do that through so many layers. From of course global regulatory layer, and we are the agency that manages spectrum globally as well as satellite orbits. And just later this year, we'll have what we call World Radio Conference, where the world comes together to agree how that is managed. And the idea of that, of course, in terms of access to data, wireless plays a huge role. We just discussed how smartphones change their use everywhere in the world. To, of course, different gamut of standards to our development work. And our development work will also focus from helping national frameworks, in terms of regulatory frameworks that enable private sector investment flow, because only government fund money would not help, to then going down and making sure that the, let's say, demand side is there.
I think we have everything we need. I mean, for digitalization, for reaching, well, maybe not for net zero emissions, but close to this, we have everything. So now the focus is on the implementation. And on implementation, well, Nelly is implementing digital solutions already. We have partners all around Europe and Africa. In Africa, we have a guy called Mr. Samuel. And he's working with small farmers. He has his own training center for them, bringing farmers over there, training for a week. And then those farmers go to their own villages, apply new practices, start using software to, I don't know, to kind of order some seed or fertilizers or whatever they need. So we have those implementers. Now it's only about supporting those local people. I think we are going to the right direction anyways. There are many challenges. There are new challenges even we don't know about, but we will figure it out. We are going to the right direction, and it's mainly about supporting the implementation of the existing technologies. If you would implement, well, solar energy, like energy from the sun or wind, this is the cheapest already today. Implementing this on farming, there are already so many solutions that can improve the productivity in the farming, digital solutions, implementing those. And I guess Nelly can give really good examples how she is working together with young people in Kenya to educate them how to implement, how to be those kind of activators in their villages and make sure that the digitalization is happening over there.
Right.
So when I was thinking about starting Tech-led Africa, there's a question that kept coming up in my head, which was, why is rural Africa poor? Are we just born to suffer? Are we just born to just worry about food and health? And it took me a really long time to come down to digital tools, to come down to digital economy, because I was like, oh, well, if I teach these kids how to code and they're hungry, what am I doing? Or if they're sick and all that. And what gave me comfort and what really kind of like made it okay for me to just focus on this part is that just the power of it, just how technology is such a magnifier. We are seeing even how M-Pesa transformed everything. Before M-Pesa, we used to put money on an envelope and send it. So if I'm in school, my mom needs to send me money, puts money on an envelope, put it on a matatu, which is like a bus, and get it all the way to school. Now we just get a text message. And what was really particularly powerful is just how when you are able to earn money online, let's say you're working for Google you're working for WTO as a software engineer from Mogotio, and you're able to earn that money, you get to decide what to do with your money, and you're able to spend on food, education, and so on. And so it's very hard to worry about climate change when you're just trying to feed your kids that night, or you're just trying to survive, just trying to treat your kids. So I thought about it and I realized, like, hey, if I can get rid of poverty, if I can sustainably fix poverty, create jobs for these people at a very, very cheap infrastructure, because all you need to do is just educate these people, then we're bringing more people to the table. Right. Then we're going to have more people talking about climate change solutions. Then we're going to have more people actually be part of the solutions.
How do you see, what the gap that we are talking about, especially the developing economies? Where are they in terms of designing our solutions?
So I'll start with the Asian one. We started a project at UNEP that was funded by the government of Japan, actually, and it's to do with plastic pollution in rivers in Asia. And it turns out that most projects, when they talk about plastic pollution, they look at oceans and seas and things like that, but actually rivers are some of the biggest contributors. And so what we implemented together with a bunch of partners is a system that is AI-enabled, that detects plastics in rivers and classifies the type of plastic. So what exactly is it? Where is it? Where are the hotspots? And not only that, but it connects with different local communities, like schools, for example, to organize campaigns to go and clean those hotspots. And at the same time, trace based on the type of plastic and the type of material and so on and so forth, it traces it back across the supply chain to its origin, so that we know what the source of pollution is and can start fixing the problem at the source. So this is a project that's been implemented quite successfully for a few rivers in Asia. We're hoping to take it to Africa and other continents next. The other Africa-based project has to do with agriculture, actually. So one of the biggest problems in Egypt, where I'm originally from, is that in the Nile Delta, most farming plots are very small and owned by relatively poor farmers who don't have access to a lot of technology and a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. And this creates a problem for them because they can't market their crops. They don't often know what they need to know in terms of using pesticides and fertilizers and that kind of stuff. So what we implemented was a two-stage project. The first phase was a smart assistant for farmers. We implemented a chatbot, voice-enabled, so you don't have to know how to read and write, that gives them advice. And you can just snap a picture of a pest, for example, on a plant, have it diagnosed in seconds, and know how to treat it. You know what the market price is for your crop, when to irrigate, when to plant what, and so on and so forth. So again, this is an example of how a government can make an impact on a very, very local and individual level.
Professor.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at the big picture, I think in many ways, again, from a science engineering point of view, we have the solutions to many of the problems. For example, I will again go back to, say, the IPCC second assessment, IPCC last assessment report, working group 2, that talks about adaptation. And so there is a very nice, figure, 2 pages of figures, and it has all the different adaptation, measures that you could take. And then there are rows of, what are the barriers? And science and technology is not a barrier. In other words, we do know how to do these things. For example, Robin earlier was talking about, carbon neutral farming. So for example, if you look at using forests as a kind of adaptation or even mitigation solution, for example, biological carbon sequestration is going to be, or has the possibility of being used as a large carbon sink, and that you could trade, if and when we have carbon permits.
Robin.
Yeah,
very briefly, please. You raised your hand earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Listening to this panel, then we are doing very well with innovation. Now it's mainly about implementation.
Yes.
Nelly over here is working with computers that are 3 years old. So, and they are changing lives. So it's mainly about the implementation. We have so many conferences about AI, about innovation and so on. Now it's time about implementing the existing technology and getting to the same level on that side as well.
I'm so glad that through this public forum, we realize what is the biggest challenge. It's implementation, it's action. And meanwhile, everybody on the stage are trying to provide specific examples about how to provide solutions, how to give solutions. One of the things as a moderator, I'm pleasantly surprised is the fact that all the panelists are trying to provide very well-founded solutions based on numbers, their own experiences, as well as the collective experiences they have sought from all the others they are working with. So I want to thank you for that. Meanwhile, as we are approaching MC13 coming next year, this is going to be a grand opportunity for all of us to implement what we said today with actions. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, on the panel, and great appreciation for all of you. With that, we're coming to the end of this high-level session on digital boost to green innovation. I'm Tian Wei. Thank you so much. Bye.